Give us what you got.
Get back. You're not touching them.
Leave us alone.
Let go of my family right now.
Get off me. Give us the bags and nobody gets hurt.
Get away from my family. You're not taking anything.
Give us what you got.
Get back. Leave my family alone.
Give me the bag now.
Get away from him. Back off.
Sign the document. You owe us everything on this list.
We're not signing anything. Get back! Don't make this difficult. Move. We're not going anywhere. Back off. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Give us your things. We're done being victims.
Back off.
Give us what you came for.
We're not afraid of you. Leave us alone.
Move aside, we're taking it.
You are not touching my family. Back off now. Hand it over. Don't make this difficult.
We're walking away now. Don't touch my family.
Give us the sign now. Get back! You're not taking anything. We are not handing over the case. Stand down now, or you will regret it.
The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the nearly empty street. It was a warm evening in downtown Atlanta, but the tension in the air was thick. Monica Brown held her son, DeAndre's, hand tightly, her heart pounding in her chest. They had just finished a quick stop at the convenience store for a few snacks on their way home, the weight of the long day pulling at her limbs. DeAndre's chatter about his school day barely registered in her mind. Suddenly, a loud voice broke through the hum of the night. "Hey you! Get out of the way!" Monica turned sharply. Two men, white and in their late 20s, were swaggering toward them. One had a smirk on his face, the other a sneer. Without warning, one of them shoved DeAndre, knocking him off balance. Monica's instinct was to reach out for her son, but before she could, the second man grabbed her arm. "Watch where you're walking, lady," he spat, his grip like iron. "You don't belong here." Monica's breath caught in her throat. She could feel her heartbeat in her ears as the sound of DeAndre's quiet sobs echoed in the night. The men were laughing now, oblivious to the rawness of the moment. "We don't tolerate people like you around here," the first man sneered, pushing her away. Monica's mind raced, every ounce of her being screamed for her to react, but she couldn't let her son see her break, not now. As the men continued their insults, a police car pulled up, the flashing blue lights bathing the scene in harsh, sterile light. Her eyes locked with the officer's. He didn't even flinch. The moment hung, suspended in time, as a cold realization gripped her chest. This wasn't just an encounter. This was something bigger. "Everything okay, ma'am?" the officer asked, his tone flat. The men were still laughing. And then, the officer's words cut through her like a knife. "I'm afraid you're causing a disturbance." Monica Brown felt the heat of the day lingering in the air as she and her son, DeAndre, walked down the familiar streets of their neighborhood. The sun was beginning to dip behind the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, but the humidity from the summer heat still clung to the skin. DeAndre, always the talkative one, chattered away beside her, recounting the events of his school day with his usual enthusiasm. Monica smiled as she listened, but her mind wasn't fully present. There was too much weighing on her, too many worries to keep her from fully engaging. They had just stopped at a small convenience store for some snacks, and now they were heading home. Monica's tired legs dragged as she walked, but her son's voice, filled with the innocence of youth, kept her grounded. "Mom, I got a gold star today for my math test. Miss Calloway said I was the fastest in class," DeAndre said excitedly, his eyes shining with pride. Monica's heart warmed at his joy. That's awesome, baby. Keep working hard and those stars will keep coming, she replied, her voice soft but filled with encouragement. As they approached the corner of the block, the familiar hum of the city seemed to fade as something shifted in the air. A sudden tension, an unsettled energy that Monica couldn't place. She felt it before she even saw them. Two men were walking toward them, their gait slow but purposeful. Monica instinctively stepped a little closer to DeAndre, her hand tightening around his. Her instincts told her something wasn't right. The men didn't even glance in her direction at first. One of them was tall, with short cropped hair and a cocky grin. The other, a little shorter, with a scruffy beard and a sneer, seemed more interested in the ground beneath his feet than in the people around him. But then, as they neared Monica and DeAndre, the tall one's eyes flicked up. "Hey, move out of the way," he sneered, not even slowing down. Monica's heart sank. The words were directed at her, but the tone was unmistakable. Sharp, dismissive, full of something darker. DeAndre took a half step back, his excitement faltering. Monica could feel his confusion rising, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had to be the one to protect him. "I'm sorry, we're just trying to get by," Monica said, her voice controlled but firm, as she subtly stepped in front of DeAndre. The taller man stopped. For a moment there was silence between them, heavy and thick. Then, without warning, he shoved DeAndre roughly, sending him stumbling backward. Monica's breath caught in her throat. She reached out to steady her son, but the other man moved closer, blocking her. "Watch where you're walking," the shorter man growled, his hand shooting out to grab her arm, his fingers digging into her skin. Monica's blood boiled. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. "Let go of me," she said through gritted teeth, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. The men were laughing now, mocking her, taunting her, enjoying the discomfort they had created. DeAndre stood frozen behind her, eyes wide, unable to comprehend what was happening. Before Monica could say another word, a car pulled up to the curb, its headlights flashing across the street. She glanced over and saw the blue and white of a police car. Relief almost surged through her, but it was quickly replaced with an unsettling feeling. The officer inside the vehicle hadn't even moved to step out. "Everything okay, ma'am?" The officer's voice came from the speaker, his tone flat and unfeeling. Monica's hope faltered as she looked at him. The officer's eyes scanned the scene but didn't seem concerned. The two men had already resumed their laughter, clearly emboldened by the presence of the police car. Monica's heart sank. She could feel the tension in her chest grow heavier with every passing second. "These men just—" Monica began, but before she could finish, the officer cut her off, speaking to her as if she were the problem. "I'm afraid you're causing a disturbance," he said, his eyes flicking between her and the men. Monica blinked, stunned. The words hung in the air like a slap. The officer had seen the whole thing, and yet, he was dismissing her, siding with them. "What?" Monica whispered, her voice barely above a murmur. She could feel her pulse quicken, the pressure of the situation sinking in. Her mouth went dry as the weight of his words settled on her shoulders. "You heard me," the officer replied, giving her a nod as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "I suggest you leave the area and not cause any more trouble." The taller man, who had pushed DeAndre, flashed a smile at the officer. "Yeah, get out of here, lady," he sneered, as if this was all just a joke. Monica's world tilted. She stood there, rooted to the spot, as the officer rolled up his window and turned his attention elsewhere, ignoring the men entirely. The realization hit her like a cold wave. This wasn't an isolated incident. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. The system, this city, this world had already decided. She and her son didn't matter. Not in this moment. Not to the officer. Not to these men. The coldness in her chest was overwhelming. She looked down at DeAndre, who was standing beside her now, his small hand clutching hers tightly, his wide eyes filled with confusion and fear. She bent down, her heart breaking as she tried to comfort him. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, though her voice wavered. It's okay. We'll go home now. But inside, Monica's mind was spinning. The world had just shown her its ugly face. The face that made her son feel small. The face that treated her like she was invisible, like she didn't belong. And she couldn't pretend it didn't matter anymore. She couldn't ignore the fury and the ache in her heart. The truth was clear now. They weren't going to protect her, and they weren't going to protect DeAndre. It was up to her to fight back. She turned, leading DeAndre away from the scene, her eyes fixed straight ahead. The streets seemed colder now, less familiar. And yet, deep down, Monica knew this was only the beginning. The silence in the car was oppressive, heavier than the sweltering heat outside. Monica sat behind the wheel, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel, eyes fixed straight ahead. DeAndre was unusually quiet in the passenger seat beside her, his small hands resting on his lap, his gaze out the window. The soft hum of the engine was the only sound, but it felt like 1,000 voices were echoing in the space between them, voices that only she could hear. She had tried to keep her composure, had tried to shield DeAndre from the ugliness of what had just happened. But the weight of it, the injustice, the suddenness of it, was suffocating. She couldn't shake the image of those men's smug faces, the callousness in their voices. They had humiliated her son, and all for what? For existing. For being black in a world that still didn't seem to know how to deal with it. Monica's breath hitched as she glanced at DeAndre, whose face had fallen into a quiet, confused sadness. The joy he had carried just hours earlier was gone, replaced with a weariness that didn't belong to a 10-year-old. "Mom," he finally spoke, his voice small and hesitant. "Why did they do that? Why did they push me?" Monica swallowed hard, her chest tightening. How could she explain this to him? How could she find the right words to make sense of something so senseless? She had never wanted him to experience this, to have his world shattered like this. "I don't know, baby," Monica said softly, her voice cracking slightly as she forced the words out. "People like that, they have their reasons, but they're wrong. They're hurtful, and it's not your fault. You did nothing wrong." DeAndre didn't respond immediately, and for a long while, there was just the quiet hum of the road beneath their tires. Monica could see the way his mind was working, the questions that were forming, but he didn't ask them. He didn't need to. She could see it in his eyes. He was already beginning to understand something she had desperately wanted to protect him from, the harsh reality of the world they lived in. As she drove, Monica's thoughts turned inward, the anger she had pushed aside earlier now bubbling up to the surface. She clenched her jaw, gripping the wheel even tighter. That officer, that man who had stood there and done nothing. No, worse than nothing. He had taken sides. He had made it clear that people like them, people like her, didn't matter. His inaction spoke volumes, louder than any words could. He had protected the men who had pushed her son, who had insulted her, and left them to suffer the consequences. "Do you want me to tell Dad?" DeAndre asked, his voice quiet, but the question hung in the air like a weight. Monica glanced over at him, her heart breaking. She had been so focused on trying to shield him, but she knew she couldn't hide the truth forever. She couldn't pretend like nothing had happened. "I will," Monica said, her voice steady now, despite the storm raging inside her. "We'll tell him when we get home, all right?" DeAndre nodded but didn't speak again. Monica could see the confusion in his eyes, the fear. He was still processing it all, the confrontation, the officer, the sudden shift in their world. He hadn't asked her what they were supposed to do next, but she knew he was thinking it. When they arrived home, the house felt too quiet, too empty. Monica shut off the engine, but she sat there for a moment, just staring at the door to their apartment. She felt drained, like she had been emptied out, hollowed by the weight of what had just happened. DeAndre climbed out of the car, but he didn't race ahead like he usually did. Instead, he walked slowly, his head down, his steps heavy. Monica's heart clenched as she followed him inside. She wanted to protect him from this, from the world that had just shown its ugly face to both of them, but she knew she couldn't. The reality was, this was just the beginning. It would happen again. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a reminder of the world they lived in. When they were both inside, Monica found Richard sitting at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee in his hands. He looked up as they entered, his face softening when he saw the look on Monica's face. He could tell something was wrong even before she spoke. "What happened?" Richard asked, his voice gentle, though the concern was evident. Monica exhaled sharply, her body still trembling from the aftermath. She sat down next to him, her head in her hands for a moment before she spoke. She wasn't sure how to explain what had just happened, how to make him understand what she had felt. The anger, the helplessness, the realization that nothing was going to change unless they fought for it. She told him everything. The men, the officer, the way they had treated her and DeAndre, the way the officer had sided with the men. Richard's face grew tense as she spoke, his jaw tightening, but he didn't interrupt. When she finished, there was a long pause. "I'm sorry, Monica," Richard said finally, his voice low. "I wish I could say it's a surprise, but we both know this is the world we live in." Monica nodded, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "I know. But that doesn't make it any easier." "I don't know what we can do," Richard admitted, his voice raw. "But we have to do something. For DeAndre. For us." Monica's gaze turned to DeAndre, who had gone to sit in the living room, staring blankly at the TV, though his eyes weren't focused on the screen. He was lost in his thoughts, and Monica could feel the heaviness in the air. "I don't know either," Monica said softly. "But I do know one thing. I'm not going to let them get away with this. I don't care if it's just me. I'm going to make them hear us." Richard reached out, placing his hand over hers. "We'll do this together. We'll make sure DeAndre grows up knowing he's worth something. We'll fight for him." Monica took a deep breath, feeling the first stirrings of resolve. This fight wasn't going to be easy. She had no illusions about that. But for the first time since the incident, she felt something shift inside her. She had been passive for far too long, accepting the system as it was, afraid to challenge it. But that was over. She wasn't going to let DeAndre live in a world where his safety, his dignity, could be taken away so easily. "We'll fight," she whispered, her eyes hardening with determination. The next morning, Monica woke up feeling like she was walking through thick mud. The weight of the previous day, the violence, the betrayal, the helplessness, still clung to her like an old wet coat. It wasn't just the event itself that haunted her. It was the realization that this was the way things were. She had known, of course, knew that people like her, Black, a mother trying to keep her son safe, had to fight harder for everything. But to have it so plainly laid out before her was another thing entirely. She spent the morning pacing the apartment, running through what she could do next, but every path seemed to lead to a dead end. The police department would never listen. They would cover their own like they always did. She had seen the stories, read the headlines. It was always the same. The system wasn't built to protect her. It was built to protect people like Officer Turner, people who had power and privilege on their side. But still she couldn't just walk away. Not after what happened. Not after the way her son looked at her yesterday, the confusion in his eyes. She had to do something, she had to fight back. By the time the afternoon rolled around, Monica had made up her mind. She was going to file a formal complaint. She was going to make them listen, make them acknowledge that what happened to her and DeAndre was wrong. She wasn't going to let this go, no matter how difficult it would be. She wasn't going to be silenced. After a quick lunch, she grabbed her phone and dialed the police department's non-emergency number, trying to ignore the lump that had formed in her throat. "Hello, this is Officer Richardson," the voice on the other end answered after a few rings. "Hi, I'm Monica Brown," she said, forcing the words out, her palms sweating against the phone. "I need to speak to someone about an incident that happened yesterday evening. I want to file a complaint against Officer Turner." There was a long pause on the line before the officer responded. "I'm going to transfer you to Internal Affairs," he said, his voice flat. "Please hold." Monica's stomach tightened as the line went silent. The hold music played in the background, An eerie reminder that she was about to walk into a system that was designed to silence people like her. She could already feel the doors closing, feel the resistance that was about to meet her. But she pushed the fear aside. She couldn't back down now. A few moments later, a new voice came on the line. Internal Affairs, Sergeant Harris speaking. How can I help you? Monica's pulse raced, but she kept her tone steady. I need to file a formal complaint about Officer Turner. He was involved in an incident yesterday evening in which he did nothing while my son and I were harassed and physically threatened by two men in public. When he arrived on the scene, he sided with the men and dismissed us. There was a long pause, and Monica felt her heart sink. She could hear the hesitation in the sergeant's voice when he spoke next. Ma'am, I understand your concern, but you'll need to provide more details. Can you explain exactly what happened? We'll need a full statement for the report. Monica was already prepared for this. She gave the sergeant every detail she could remember from the incident. The men, their insults, the officer's indifference. She could hear the skepticism in the sergeant's voice as she spoke, but she refused to let it deter her. I know what you're thinking, Monica said, her voice cold and firm now. You're going to try to write this off like every other case. But this time I won't let you. This time you're going to listen. There was a brief silence, and then Sergeant Harris responded. His voice tinged with something resembling respect. All right, Mrs. Brown. We'll file your report. Someone will follow up with you shortly. Just know that these things take time. Monica knew that nothing would happen quickly. She had no illusions about that. The wheels of justice were slow if they moved at all. But that didn't matter. She had started the process. She had made the call. And now they couldn't ignore her. They couldn't ignore what happened to her son. Thank you, Monica said, her voice steady now. I'll be waiting. After hanging up the phone, Monica sank into the couch, her body trembling from the nerves that had flooded her. She had done it. She had taken the first step. But now the waiting began. The next few days felt like a blur. Monica stayed glued to the news, watching the growing conversation about police brutality and racial injustice unfold across the country. It felt like the whole world was waking up, but at the same time, it was hard to shake the feeling that nothing would ever really change. The systems in place were too powerful, too entrenched. She had seen it in her own case. The officer hadn't even blinked when he dismissed them. He hadn't cared. And yet Monica couldn't stop. She couldn't give up. Not when there were people out there who still believed in the system, still believed that they could make a difference. She had to keep pushing, keep fighting. For DeAndre. For every mother who had ever felt that same cold, crushing fear. For everyone who had been made to feel small. By the end of the week, the phone call Monica had been waiting for finally came. It was from a detective with Internal Affairs, asking her to come in for a formal interview. Monica felt a rush of emotions as she set the appointment. She had started this fight, but she wasn't naive enough to believe it would be easy. The system would try to crush her, to wear her down. But now she was ready for it. She knew it wouldn't be quick. She knew it wouldn't be painless. But for the first time in a long while, she felt something stronger than the fear. She felt the faintest glimmer of hope. Monica sat at the small kitchen table. The dull hum of the refrigerator the only sound breaking the silence. DeAndre had gone to bed, but she couldn't sleep, not with everything swirling in her mind. The past week had been a whirlwind. The police department had contacted her, she'd given her full statement, and now Internal Affairs was investigating Officer Turner's actions. But even with all that, Monica couldn't shake the unease building inside her. She knew the system wouldn't be quick to change. She had seen too many people get swallowed by the machinery of power. But for the first time, she wasn't going to let it. Her phone buzzed on the table, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Kara, one of the activists she'd met at the community center a few days after the incident. Kara had reached out to her, offering support, and it had been exactly what Monica needed. She had been part of the same struggle, had faced the same injustices. And now, Kara was ready to stand beside Monica. Monica grabbed the phone and answered, trying to sound more composed than she felt. Hey, Kara. How's it going? Monica, we need to talk. Kara's voice came through, urgent but calm. We've been talking to some folks, and there's a group of us, activists, community leaders, and lawyers. We're putting together something big. Public protest. March. We need people like you to step up. Monica felt her heart race. She knew protest. She had seen them on the news in the streets, but she had never thought she'd be involved in one. Never imagined she would be standing in front of hundreds, maybe thousands of people demanding justice. I don't know, Monica said, the words coming out slower than she meant. What if it makes things worse? What if it puts DeAndre and me in more danger? Kara's voice softened, understanding the concern. I hear you. It's dangerous to speak out, especially when the system is as corrupt as it is. But here's the thing. If we stay silent, if we don't make our voices heard, nothing will ever change. These people, these officers, these systems, they need to know we're not going anywhere. You can't fight this alone, Monica. You don't have to. Monica sat in the quiet for a moment, the weight of Kara's words sinking in. She had been alone for so long in her quiet frustration, in her fear that no one would listen to her. But the truth was, she had been fighting for years in silence, not just in her own life, but for every person of color who had been ignored, sidelined, or abused by the system. She could keep fighting quietly, but where would it get her? Where would it get DeAndre? She exhaled deeply, letting the decision settle in her bones. I'll do it. I'll help organize. I'll speak out. Kara's voice cracked with emotion. Thank you, Monica. You don't know how much this means. Monica looked out the window at the street below. The light from the lamp on the sidewalk barely reached her apartment, but she could see the shadows moving in the distance, the quiet pulse of the city that was always awake but rarely noticed. Her heart pounded as she realized this was the moment. This was the moment she could change something, not just for herself but for DeAndre and for every other person who felt powerless. The march was planned for the following Saturday. It was short notice, but Monica didn't hesitate to start making calls, reaching out to people who could help. She wasn't going to be passive anymore. She wasn't going to let fear decide her future. The truth was, she had been afraid all her life. Afraid to stand out, afraid to rock the boat. But now that fear felt irrelevant. What was there to lose, really? The days leading up to the march felt like an eternity. Every step Monica took was calculated. She had to make sure DeAndre was safe while she made plans, while she made phone calls. She didn't want him to see the stress on her face, the way her mind was constantly moving, thinking of ways to keep him sheltered from the ugliness of what she was about to do. But DeAndre had started to ask questions, and it was harder to avoid answering them. He had started to notice how often his mother stayed up late, how she was constantly on the phone or typing out emails, preparing for something bigger than just one protest. One night, as Monica was gathering her things to leave for a strategy meeting, DeAndre stopped her at the door. "Mom," he said softly, his small hand gripping the edge of the doorframe. Monica turned around, startled by the quiet in his voice. She saw the concern in his eyes, the uncertainty. "You're going to be okay, right?" he asked, his voice small but filled with genuine fear. "I don't want you to get hurt." Monica's heart clenched. She knelt down to his level, her hands cupping his face. She saw the innocence in his eyes, but there was also a growing understanding of the world around him. She had tried so hard to protect him from the darkness, but now it was inevitable. "I'll be okay," she said, her voice strong despite the flutter of fear in her chest. "I'm doing this for you, for us, for everyone who has to fight for a world where we don't have to be afraid. Do you understand that?" DeAndre nodded slowly, his eyes wide, but he didn't seem fully convinced. Monica could feel his uncertainty, but she also saw something else. His respect for her, his quiet pride. He was watching her with new eyes, and though she could see his worry, there was a spark of something else in his gaze. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said softly, his voice almost a whisper. Tears pricked Monica's eyes as she pulled him into an embrace, her arms tight around him. "I'm proud of you too, baby," she whispered back. "I promise you we'll be all right." But even as she said the words, she knew it wouldn't be easy. The road ahead was full of obstacles. The march was just the beginning, and the backlash would come, but she couldn't back down. She wouldn't. Saturday arrived, and the march began in the heart of downtown Atlanta. The streets were lined with hundreds of people, men, women, children, all walking together, all demanding change. The sound of chants filled the air, the collective roar of voices rising with each step they took. Monica walked at the front of the crowd, her heart pounding as she raised her fist in solidarity, the weight of the moment crashing down on her. She was no longer just a mother trying to protect her child. She was a part of something bigger. DeAndre walked beside her, holding her hand tightly, his face a mixture of excitement and apprehension. He was proud, she could see that, but she could also see the uncertainty in his eyes. This world was harsh, it was scary, but he was learning how to stand tall. He was learning how to fight back. And that was what mattered. As they reached the steps of City Hall, where the speeches were set to begin, Monica stepped forward. The crowd hushed as she took the microphone, the weight of her voice carrying across the square. She looked out over the sea of faces, people who had gathered to fight, to speak their truth. And for the first time in her life, Monica felt the fear fade away. I stand here today because I am tired of watching my son grow up in a world where people like us are constantly made to feel small, she began, her voice rising with each word. I stand here today because I refuse to be silent any longer. We will not be ignored. We will not be silenced. The crowd erupted in applause, the sound ringing in her ears like music. But more than that, it was the feeling of something changing. This wasn't just a protest. This wasn't just a march. This was the beginning of something far bigger, a movement that wouldn't be stopped. Monica's voice steadied as she continued, the fire of determination burning bright in her chest. This is our fight. And we're not backing down. We're here, and we're not going anywhere. As the crowd roared with approval, Monica turned to look at DeAndre, who stood with his fist raised, a small but powerful symbol of the future she was fighting to create. The march was over, but the fire it ignited was far from extinguished. What began as a gathering of a few hundred people demanding justice had turned into a wave, and Monica could feel it growing beneath her feet. Every day after the march, the media picked up the story, amplifying the voices of those who had been silenced for too long. Interviews, news stories, and social media posts kept the conversation alive, spreading it beyond Atlanta, beyond the state, across the country. Monica could feel the shift in the air, the pressure mounting. The city was listening. But with that attention came a sense of urgency. Monica couldn't ignore the mounting backlash. Already, people had begun to question the protest. They had started to paint the movement as disruptive, even dangerous. The police union issued a statement claiming the protest was an unlawful assembly, and the mayor's office was scrambling to contain the fallout. Despite the scrutiny, Monica had never felt more resolute. There was no turning back now. She had opened a door, and she wasn't going to close it. Still, the reality of what she was facing began to settle in. There were calls from reporters, some sympathetic, some antagonistic. There were people online labeling her a troublemaker, using her name as a target for their hate. But it didn't matter. Not anymore. What mattered was DeAndre. What mattered was the fight for justice. For him, for all the other children growing up in a world where they had to fear the very people sworn to protect them. It was only a few days after the march when the catalyst came, the spark that would force the issue to the front pages and into the courtroom. Monica was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee, when the phone rang. She knew the number by heart. It was from one of the lawyers they had been in touch with, someone who had agreed to help her in the fight for accountability. Her stomach flipped as she picked up the phone, unsure of what news it would bring. Monica Brown. The voice on the other end was firm yet kind. This is Detective Harris from the police department. I'm calling in reference to the complaint you filed against Officer Turner. Monica's pulse quickened. She set her cup down, her voice tight with anticipation. Yes, I'm listening. We've reviewed the footage from the incident you reported, both the body camera footage and the surveillance footage from nearby businesses. After a thorough review, we've uncovered something alarming. Officer Turner, along with the two individuals you described, was seen laughing during the altercation. Not only that, but we have statements from additional witnesses who confirm Turner did not attempt to de-escalate the situation, and in fact appeared to encourage the men. Monica felt her breath catch. She had always suspected it. She had known deep in her gut that Officer Turner wasn't just indifferent. He had been complicit. But to hear it confirmed, to know there was concrete evidence, it was both validating and horrifying. The detective continued. We've decided to move forward with an official investigation into Officer Turner's conduct. He's been placed on administrative leave while we proceed with the review. We're also looking into the two men involved. Monica felt a rush of emotions: relief, anger, disbelief. She had spent days waiting for this moment, but now that it was here, it felt surreal. Turner would have to answer for his actions. But the work wasn't over. The system wouldn't just hand her justice. She had to make sure they followed through, had to keep pushing until something changed. "Thank you for this," Monica said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind inside her. "But this doesn't stop here. I need to make sure this doesn't get swept under the rug." "I understand," Detective Harris said. "We're committed to seeing this through. I'll keep you updated as we move forward." As the call ended, Monica set the phone down slowly. For the first time in days, she felt a spark of hope. Turner's actions were being exposed. The world was starting to see him for what he was: a man who had taken advantage of his power, someone who had been given the authority to protect and serve, but had instead used it to harass and harm. But she knew this was just one battle in a much larger war. The police department would fight back. The system would fight back. And they would try to discredit her, try to downplay the entire situation. Monica wasn't naive. But she had already made up her mind. She wasn't going to stop until she had accountability, not just for Officer Turner, but for every other officer, every other person who used their power to oppress and abuse. That evening, Monica gathered the small group of activists she had been working with. They met at a local coffee shop, the air thick with determination. Kara was there, along with a few others from the community, including a lawyer who had been helping with the legal side of things. They knew they couldn't back down now. The momentum had shifted in their favor, but there was still so much more to do. "We've got the evidence," Kara said, her voice low but fierce. "Now we need to keep the pressure on. We need to get the word out. The more people we have behind us, the stronger our position." Monica nodded. "We can't let this be a one-day story. We need to make sure Turner's actions are exposed, that people see what happens when officers abuse their power." The group agreed, and plans started to form. They would continue organizing rallies, continue pushing the narrative that this wasn't just about one bad officer. It was about a system that allowed this kind of behavior to flourish. They would take the fight to City Hall, to the mayor's office. They would demand changes, not just for the police department, but for the entire justice system that failed them time and time again. As the night wore on, the plan became clear. Monica would take her fight public. She would speak directly to the media, to the people. She wouldn't be silenced anymore. She would be the voice for those who had been crushed under the weight of systemic oppression. She wasn't just a mother anymore. She was a movement. DeAndre had fallen asleep on the couch by the time Monica returned home. His face peaceful, unaware of the battles his mother was fighting on his behalf. Monica sat beside him, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. She had promised him that she would keep him safe. She would keep that promise no matter the cost. She had no idea how long this fight would last or how much it would cost her. But she knew this much: she wouldn't back down. Not now. Not ever. The next few weeks felt like an uphill battle, each day bringing new challenges, new hurdles to overcome. The press was relentless, and while many outlets supported Monica's cause, others tried to paint her as a troublemaker. Some even went as far as to question her character, implying that she was exaggerating the severity of the incident, suggesting that it wasn't as bad as she made it out to be. But Monica didn't flinch. She couldn't. The truth was on her side. The city had been buzzing since the protests, and the pressure was mounting on both the police department and the mayor's office. There were more protests planned. The media continued to report on the case, pushing it to the forefront of public discussion. The demand for justice was louder now, and Monica wasn't going to let it fade into the background. She knew the risks. She had seen how quickly a story like this could be buried, but she also knew that the more people who spoke out, the harder it would be to ignore. But despite all the noise, it was the personal toll that weighed most heavily on Monica. She hadn't expected the sleepless nights, the stress that came with every phone call, every interview, every public appearance. She hadn't expected the isolation either, the way some people who had once been her allies began to distance themselves. She had always known that standing up against the system would be difficult, but she hadn't expected it to cost her relationships too. She was finding that fighting for justice was not just a battle against the system. It was a battle against her own fears, her own insecurities, and, at times, even the people she had trusted most. DeAndre, too, was changing. He was older now, growing more aware of the world around him. He had started asking harder questions. Questions that Monica wasn't always sure how to answer. Why did the police do nothing? Why did people treat him differently? Why did they treat his mom like she was the one in the wrong? One evening, as Monica sat on the couch reviewing a stack of papers, DeAndre came in from the kitchen, holding a piece of paper in his hand. His eyes were wide with concern. "Mom, what's this?" he asked, holding out the paper. It was a news article from a local paper that DeAndre had apparently found while he was looking through some old magazines in the kitchen. Monica took the paper and scanned it quickly. Her stomach dropped. It was an editorial piece from a local columnist, one that had written extensively on the protests, but this piece took a sharp turn. The writer was questioning Monica's credibility, calling her out for making a mountain out of a molehill, and insinuating that she was stirring up trouble in the community. DeAndre's face was serious. "Are they right, Mom? Is it really my fault? Did I do something wrong?" Monica's heart shattered at his question. She had been doing everything she could to shield him from the darker side of this fight, but here it was, staring her in the face. The world was trying to twist everything around, trying to make them feel like the problem was their resistance, not the system they were fighting against. "No, baby," she said softly, setting the paper down and pulling him close. "This isn't your fault. This is about something bigger, something that's been happening for a long time. People who don't understand what we're fighting for will say things like this. But it doesn't make them right." She paused, feeling her throat tighten as she struggled to find the right words. "What's happening to us, what happened to you that night, it's not just about us. It's about every person who's been treated like they don't matter. It's about all the people who've been silenced. And now we're speaking up." DeAndre looked up at her, his eyes serious and wide, and for a brief moment, Monica saw the strength in him. It wasn't the same innocent, carefree boy who had walked into that store a few weeks ago. He had changed. He had grown. And so had she. The next day, Monica stood at the front of a crowded press conference, the weight of hundreds of eyes on her. The podium was high, and the microphone seemed to amplify every breath, every word. She felt a mix of fear and resolve, but mostly she felt exhaustion. She hadn't slept well in days, and the emotional toll of everything, the constant attacks on her character, the constant fight for her son's safety, was wearing her down. But she couldn't stop. She wouldn't stop. A local news reporter stood up, microphone in hand, ready to ask the first question. Monica had been briefed by her legal team on what to expect. She had rehearsed her answers. She knew that everything she said could be twisted, taken out of context. But she was ready. "Ms. Brown," the reporter began, "you've been at the center of this protest for weeks now. What is it that you hope to accomplish by continuing to speak out? What is the ultimate goal here?" Monica cleared her throat, stepping toward the microphone, her eyes scanning the room. It was a simple question, but one that carried so much weight. What was she hoping to accomplish? "I'm here because my son deserves better," Monica said, her voice steady, though the words were heavy. "I'm here because we've been ignored for far too long. I'm here because when people like me, people like my son, face discrimination or violence or harassment, we are told to be quiet. We're told to let it go, to not make waves. But the truth is, we can't afford to stay silent anymore. She paused, letting the words hang in the air before continuing. I'm not asking for a favor. I'm asking for justice. And that's not something anyone should have to beg for. That's something every person deserves. The room was quiet for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. There were murmurs, but no one interrupted. Monica felt her heart pounding in her chest, but she pressed on. I will not back down. I will not let my son grow up in a world where he is made to feel like he doesn't matter. And I will not let the people who have failed him, who have failed all of us, go unaccountable. The reporter asked a few more questions, but Monica was on fire now, the words flowing freely. She was no longer just defending herself. She was defending her son. She was defending every person who had been treated like they didn't matter. She was speaking for those who had been silenced for far too long. After the press conference, Monica felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she had let go of the anger she had been holding in. She had said everything she needed to say. The pressure was still there, of course. The fight was far from over. But for the first time, Monica felt like she had taken control of the narrative. She had told her truth, and no one could take that away from her. But as she returned home that evening, she knew there was more to come. The backlash would come hard and fast. The system wouldn't let her win without a fight. The question was, how far was she willing to go to make sure her son grew up in a world where justice wasn't just a dream? Monica didn't have all the answers. But one thing was certain, she wasn't backing down. The days that followed the press conference were a blur of constant phone calls, media interviews, and even more protests. Monica barely had time to breathe. The fight was intensifying, and every moment seemed like a battle. She had become a public figure now, a symbol of resistance, and with that came both a platform and a target. The media scrutiny was intense, and while many supported her cause, there were just as many critics who saw her as a troublemaker, stirring division rather than bringing unity. The pressure was mounting. DeAndre had been quieter than usual, retreating into his room more often. His eyes always watching his mother with that quiet, knowing look. He wasn't the carefree child he once was. Monica couldn't blame him. He had seen it all. The fear in her eyes, the exhaustion in her voice, the late-night calls, the constant media presence. Her son, too young to understand the full scope of what she was fighting for, had already started to carry the weight of it all. The innocence she had tried so desperately to protect him from was slipping away. It was late one evening when Monica got another call from Detective Harris. She had been expecting it, but the timing still made her heart race. Mrs. Brown, Harris said, his voice measured. I'm calling to update you on the investigation into Officer Turner. We've completed the review of the body camera footage and the witness statements. We've also managed to track down additional incidents involving Turner from other officers who've worked with him. The department is taking this very seriously. Monica held her breath. This was the moment. This could be the breakthrough she had been hoping for. I'm glad to hear that, she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. But I need to know, are we moving toward a public indictment? Will Turner face real consequences for his actions? There was a long pause, and Monica could feel her heart sink. I'm afraid it's complicated, Harris said. The department is currently conducting an internal review. Turner has been placed on paid administrative leave, but as of now, we don't have enough evidence to proceed with formal charges. It's a slow process. And with the attention this case is getting, things have become more politically charged than we anticipated. Monica felt a surge of frustration. She had known it wouldn't be easy, but hearing it directly from him felt like a punch to the gut. The truth was, the system wasn't built to give justice to people like her. She had known that from the beginning. I understand, she said, her voice quiet but filled with resolve. But I won't stop pushing. You have my full support, but you need to do more. Turner shouldn't be allowed to slip through the cracks just because he has power. We're doing everything we can, Mrs. Brown, Harris replied. His voice strained, as if he were already bracing for her next question. But we're not at a point where we can take public action yet. We need more time to process the evidence. It's just the way the system works. Monica's stomach twisted. She could hear the same familiar words that always seemed to follow these cases. More time, processing the evidence, working within the system. It was a tactic to delay, to avoid the truth. I've waited long enough, she said, her voice sharp. I'm not asking for more time. I'm demanding accountability. I will not let this be swept under the rug. And neither should you. Harris sighed on the other end of the line. I understand your frustration, but I need you to be patient. You'll be updated as soon as there's a breakthrough. Monica hung up the phone, her hands shaking. The system was working exactly as it was designed to. It was slow, bureaucratic, and incredibly easy to manipulate. They weren't going to do anything until there was enough public pressure to make them act. But Monica wasn't naive enough to think she could rely on them. She had to make her own pressure. The next day Monica called Kara. She had been contemplating the next move, and she needed the strength of the movement behind her more than ever. We need to turn the heat up, Monica said, her voice hard like steel. The police department is dragging their feet, and I'm not going to let them sit on their hands while my son and I continue to live in fear. We need more protests, more action. We need to make sure the whole city knows what Turner did. That his actions can't just be buried under the rug like so many others. Kara was silent for a moment, but Monica could tell she was nodding, agreeing with every word. I hear you, Monica, she said, her voice low. We've been building something big behind the scenes. The media is already paying attention, and we've got a whole network of people who are ready to step up. But we need a plan, something that will shake this city to its core. Monica thought for a moment, then spoke with conviction. We need to organize the largest protest this city has ever seen. We need to flood the streets with voices. Hundreds, thousands of people. We need to show the mayor, the police department, and the world that we won't back down. This is bigger than just my case. This is about the system as a whole. Kara agreed, and within hours they began making calls. Monica knew that a massive protest would bring more attention than they could ever get through traditional legal channels. If they wanted to force action, they had to do it the hard way. Disrupt, demand, and take control of the narrative. The protest was set for 2 weeks later. As the day approached, Monica's anxiety grew. She had never been a leader on this scale before. She had always kept her head down, tried to live quietly, protect her son, and avoid confrontation. But now, with the world watching, she couldn't hide anymore. The weight of it was crushing at times, the fear of what might happen next gnawing at her every thought. DeAndre had been asking more questions, and while Monica did her best to shield him, she knew he was learning, growing, understanding the world in a way she had never wanted him to. But his questions weren't just about the protests. He wanted to know why people treated him differently, why his skin made people treat him like he was less than. Mom, DeAndre said one night as they sat together, do you think people will stop being mean to me when I grow up? Monica looked at her son. His face a mix of confusion and frustration. Her heart broke for him. How could she explain the complexities of a world that saw him as a threat, as less than? How could she explain that his worth wasn't tied to the color of his skin, but that people still saw it that way? No, baby, she said, her voice full of sorrow. I don't think people will stop being mean to you. Not right away. But we're going to change that. We're going to make sure that when you grow up, you don't have to be afraid. You don't have to hide. You're going to have a future where you can be proud of who you are. DeAndre smiled faintly. It wasn't the carefree smile she had once known, but it was something. He was learning how to be strong. As the protest day arrived, Monica stood in front of the crowd, her eyes scanning the sea of people. This was the moment. She had crossed the point of no return. And for the first time she didn't feel alone. The fight was bigger than her now. She had led them here, and together they were going to make their voices heard. They weren't just fighting for her and DeAndre anymore. They were fighting for everyone who had ever been made to feel small, who had ever been treated like they didn't matter. The day of the protest arrived with an electric buzz in the air. The streets were thick with anticipation, as people from all walks of life gathered in the heart of downtown Atlanta, ready to demand justice. Monica felt the weight of the crowd pressing against her, their collective energy a powerful force. It was a sea of faces, black and white, young and old, all coming together for one cause: accountability for the officers who had betrayed them and for the system that allowed it to happen. The protest was massive, much bigger than anyone had anticipated. Thousands had shown up, each person adding their voice to the roar that filled the streets. Monica stood at the front, her fist raised high, her voice lost among the chants, but her heart steady. She could feel the power of the movement in her bones. DeAndre walked beside her, his small hand gripping hers tightly. He had insisted on being there, on standing with his mother, even though Monica had tried to shield him from the danger that came with such a large gathering. But there was a fire in his eyes now, a quiet resolve that she couldn't deny. He wasn't afraid. He was ready to stand just like his mother. "Mom, we're really doing this, huh?" DeAndre asked, looking up at her. Monica smiled down at him, her throat tight with emotion. "Yes, baby. We're doing this. Together." The march moved like a tidal wave, unstoppable, sweeping through the city streets. The crowd was loud and united, their voices reverberating off the buildings, echoing the message that had been suppressed for far too long. Monica could feel the power building with every step they took. This wasn't just a protest anymore. It was a movement, a wave of change that was gathering force. As they approached the steps of City Hall, the heart of their destination, Monica saw the barricades that had been set up, the police officers standing at the ready. The mayor had promised not to use force, but it was clear that the tension was rising. The mayor's office had been scrambling to make public statements, calling for peace, but the reality was they were cornered. They couldn't ignore the truth anymore, and that terrified them. Monica stepped forward, standing tall at the front of the crowd as she addressed the masses. She could hear her heart pounding in her chest, the adrenaline coursing through her veins, but she was calm. She had been here before, had stood before smaller crowds, but never like this. Never with so much on the line. "Today is the day we make our voices heard," Monica shouted into the microphone. "Today is the day we demand change. We will no longer sit in the shadows, waiting for justice to come to us. We will bring justice to them." The crowd erupted in cheers, their energy surging, and Monica felt the power of their collective will wash over her. The chant of "No justice, no peace" rang out, filling the air, a unified cry that refused to be ignored. But just as the crowd began to settle into the rhythm of the march, Monica saw it, the first sign of resistance. Police officers began to move in, their riot gear glinting in the sunlight, shields raised. The barricades were tightening. They were preparing for a confrontation. Monica's heart sank, but she didn't flinch. This wasn't new. She had known this might happen. The system would try to intimidate them. The city would try to silence them. But she couldn't stop now. She wouldn't. "We're not backing down," Monica shouted, turning to face the crowd. "We are not here to fight. We are here for justice. We are here for our children. We will not be intimidated." The officers, now in full formation, began to move forward, their shields clashing against one another, their faces unreadable behind their masks. The sound of their boots on the concrete felt like thunder in Monica's chest. She saw Kara near the front of the crowd, leading chants, trying to keep the energy focused on the cause. Monica nodded at her, a silent understanding passing between them. They weren't backing down. But the tension was palpable. The air was thick with anticipation, with fear, with the hope that this would be the moment the city would finally hear them. The first shout came. Someone from the crowd, frustrated by the police presence, began shouting at the officers. Then, another voice, and another, until the energy turned electric, and Monica could feel the crowd vibrating with it. DeAndre looked up at her, his face pale. "Mom, are they going to hurt us?" Monica kneeled down to him, her face softening. She had promised him they would be safe, but she couldn't promise him that everything would be all right. Not anymore. The fight was too big. The forces at play were too powerful. "No one is going to hurt us, baby," she said, her voice steady, though she could feel the fear gnawing at her own stomach. "We're standing for what's right. We're making sure the world knows we're not going to stay quiet anymore." But as Monica stood facing the crowd, she saw the shift. The first police officer stepped forward, and before anyone could react, the line broke. The crowd surged forward, a mass of bodies pushing against the police barricades, and Monica's heart raced. The moment exploded into chaos. The first protester was shoved to the ground, a young woman who had been shouting for justice. Monica's eyes locked onto her as the police began pushing harder, using force to disperse the crowd. A few more were pushed back, some falling to the ground, others resisting, but it was clear now. The city wasn't going to listen quietly. They were going to force their way through, even if it meant blood. Monica felt the chaos sweep over her, felt the rage building in her chest, but she couldn't let it overtake her. She had to stay focused. This wasn't about anger. It wasn't about violence. This was about standing for what was right, even when it seemed impossible. The first flash of a baton striking someone sent a chill through Monica's body, and she saw DeAndre's eyes widen, fear creeping in. This wasn't what she had wanted for him. This wasn't the future she had imagined. But the truth was, she had already exposed him to the darkness. There was no turning back now. "Stay close to me," Monica shouted to DeAndre, her voice urgent. She grabbed his hand tightly and pulled him behind the crowd as they pressed forward. She could hear the shouting, the clashes of police shields against protest signs, the shouts of resistance and defiance. The air smelled thick with the scent of sweat, smoke, and fear. Monica's chest tightened, but she stood firm, refusing to let herself be swept away. The media were capturing everything, every confrontation, every moment of tension. This was what they had been waiting for. This was the moment that would define everything. The moment that they would make the world see, make the world understand. Monica could feel the power of that moment like an electric current running through her veins. And just as the police began to move in even closer, a voice rose from the crowd, shouting the one word that would carry them through it all. "Resist." It was a chant, called to stand strong. And as the world around her seemed to fall apart, Monica Brown knew one thing above all else. They weren't done. They weren't finished. Not yet. The days after the protest were a blur. Monica had expected the chaos to escalate, but she hadn't anticipated how the aftermath would feel, like walking through a fog, where everything was muffled and distant. The police had arrested dozens of protesters, and though Monica wasn't one of them, the weight of seeing so many of her peers detained, their voices silenced in an instant, made her sick. The media picked up on the violence, but they didn't show the larger story. The mothers who had lost their children to police violence, the activists who had been fighting for years in the shadows, the communities who were tired of waiting for change. Monica tried to keep moving forward, but it was exhausting. Every phone call, every interview, every conversation felt like another mountain to climb. She hadn't realized how much the pressure had taken out of her, how much it drained her emotionally. DeAndre was quieter, too, withdrawn in ways that made her worry. He had witnessed so much, the protests, the confrontations, the police violence. She hadn't wanted him to see it, hadn't wanted him to carry the weight of it so young. Monica knew they needed to heal, both physically and emotionally, but the reality of the fight they were in made healing feel impossible. The system that was supposed to protect them had failed, and the deep scars were starting to show. One evening, after yet another long day of interviews and phone calls with her legal team, Monica found herself staring out the window, watching the sunset over the city. The air was thick with humidity, a summer evening settling into dusk. She felt the weight of everything pressing on her. DeAndre's questions, the endless barrage of media, the uncertainty of the next steps in the fight for justice. She hadn't expected it to be this hard. She hadn't expected it to feel like she was walking through mud every single day. "Mom!" DeAndre's voice interrupted her thoughts, soft but unsure. Monica turned around to find him standing in the doorway. His expression distant, like he was trying to figure out his place in the world. "Hey, baby," Monica said, her voice gentle. "What's up?" DeAndre walked slowly toward her, his eyes downcast. "I've been thinking about what happened at the protest. I don't want you to get hurt, Mom." Monica's heart clenched. She had tried so hard to shield him from the darker parts of the world, but he was old enough now to understand the danger, to understand that their fight came with risks. "I know, baby. I don't want to get hurt either," Monica said softly, kneeling down to his level. "But I need you to understand that this is bigger than us. This is for everyone who's been hurt by the system. I'm doing this because I want you to grow up in a world that's better, a world where you don't have to be afraid." DeAndre looked up at her, his eyes full of confusion and concern. "But why is the world like that? Why do people hurt other people? Why are you fighting, Mom?" Monica paused, her heart heavy. She had asked herself that same question 1,000 times. Sometimes people hurt others because they're afraid, or because they've been taught to believe certain things about people who are different from them. And it's not fair. It's not right. But we can't change it unless we speak up. Unless we make sure that the people in power know that we're not going to take it anymore. We have to show them that we're not afraid. DeAndre nodded slowly, though his brow was furrowed in concern. "I just don't want you to get hurt. I don't want you to leave me." Monica reached out and pulled him into a tight hug, pressing her cheek to his hair. "I'm not going anywhere, baby. I promise you I'll always come back to you. But this fight, it's not just for me. It's for you too. It's for every kid who feels like they don't belong. It's for every mother who's had to fight for her children. And we're going to make sure things change. Together." DeAndre pulled back, his small face serious. "I want to help too. I want to fight." Monica smiled softly, brushing his hair out of his eyes. "You are helping, baby. Just by being you. You're already making a difference just by being brave. And you always will be." As DeAndre nodded, Monica felt a surge of pride, mixed with the deep ache of knowing how much her son had already been forced to grow up. He wasn't just her child. He was already a part of this fight, carrying the weight of everything they were up against. And in his own way, he was teaching her to keep going, to keep pushing, to never let the fight slip away. Even when it felt impossible. The next morning, after another restless night of sleep, Monica sat with her legal team to discuss the next steps. They were pressing for internal investigations into Officer Turner's actions, but it was clear from the police department's stance that they were reluctant to move forward quickly. Turner remained on paid administrative leave, and the department was reluctant to make any real change without mounting public pressure. It was frustrating. Monica had learned that the system wasn't designed to act quickly or fairly. It was designed to move slowly, to delay, to give the illusion of action without ever truly changing anything. But that wasn't enough for her. It couldn't be. "Monica, we need to keep the pressure on," Kara said during a strategy meeting later that afternoon. "The momentum is with us, but we have to keep organizing. The more people we have, the harder it will be for the city to ignore us. We need to push for more. We need to demand not just justice for your case, but reform for the entire police department." Monica nodded. She knew that this wasn't just about Officer Turner anymore. It was about changing the system. About making sure that DeAndre and every other child who looked like him would grow up in a world that treated them with dignity and respect. They couldn't just fight for one officer. They had to fight for all of them. For the entire system that had failed too many people for too long. "I'm in," Monica said, her voice steady. "We keep going. We keep fighting." The decision was made. Monica would continue to speak out. She would keep pushing for justice, not just for her son, but for every child who would grow up in the shadow of this broken system. She would demand accountability, demand change, and keep raising her voice until they couldn't ignore her anymore. That evening, as she sat at the table with DeAndre, her phone buzzed with an update from her lawyer. The internal investigation into Officer Turner was moving forward. There was a hearing scheduled, and they had gathered enough evidence to demand a public trial. Monica felt a rush of relief wash over her. They were moving closer to accountability. But she also knew this was just the beginning. The fight would be long and it would be hard. But she was ready for it. And as she looked at DeAndre, sitting across from her, she saw the strength in his eyes. He was ready to. Together they were going to change the world. The day of the hearing arrived, and Monica could feel the weight of everything bearing down on her once again. She had fought so hard to get here, to see this moment materialize, but as she sat in the courtroom, the reality of what lay ahead still felt like a distant mountain, just barely within reach. She wasn't sure what she expected, but something about the cold sterility of the courtroom, its high ceilings, the judge's gavel, the way the lawyers moved with such practiced calm, made it all feel so impersonal, so detached from the raw pain she had lived through, from the fears she had carried every day for her son. The courtroom buzzed with a low hum of lawyers talking to their clients, papers rustling, and the occasional cough, but to Monica, it all felt like background noise. She had been through so much already, had stood in front of cameras, shouted into microphones, and faced the wrath of people who didn't believe in her cause. Yet here, in this room, in front of the powerful, the question remained. Would they really listen? DeAndre sat next to her, his small hand gripping hers tightly. He had insisted on being there, just like at the protest, just like at every other pivotal moment in their fight. He wanted to see it through, wanted to witness what his mother had been doing, wanted to be a part of it. Monica wasn't sure if he fully understood everything, but she did know one thing. He had learned courage in ways she hadn't been prepared for. "Mom, will the judge make the right choice?" DeAndre whispered, his voice small but earnest. Monica glanced down at him, her heart swelling with pride. She had tried to protect him, to shield him from the ugliness, but in doing so, she had taught him something far more valuable. She had taught him how to stand up, how to find his voice even when the world seemed determined to silence it. "I hope so, baby," Monica replied, squeezing his hand. "But no matter what, we've already made a difference. We've already made them listen. And that's more than I could have ever hoped for." DeAndre nodded, his eyes focused ahead. His calmness surprised her, but then she remembered. This fight, this journey, they weren't just hers. They were his too. The courtroom doors swung open, and everyone stood as the judge entered. Monica's heart hammered in her chest. This was it. This was the moment they had been waiting for, and she had no idea how it would unfold. The entire case had drawn national attention, but there was always the possibility that the system would refuse to change, that they would protect their own and let this slip through the cracks. As the judge took her seat, she began reading through the charges. She outlined the evidence gathered by Detective Harris, the statements from witnesses who had seen Officer Turner's behavior, and the video footage that clearly showed his involvement in the altercation. Monica held her breath as the words filled the air. Evidence, facts, undeniable proof. It was all there, laid out before them. When it was time for Turner's defense, the lawyer stood up and tried to poke holes in the case, claiming that Turner had acted within the scope of his duties, that he had tried to intervene, and that the situation had escalated beyond anyone's control. Monica could feel her blood pressure rise as the lawyer downplayed the very real harm that had been done, as if their pain, their humiliation, was just an unfortunate accident. But Monica wasn't backing down. She had been through too much, fought too hard, to let Turner's lawyer manipulate the narrative. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how important it was for her to speak, to stand up again and again. Her voice was the most powerful tool she had, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that from her. As the proceedings continued, Monica's lawyer finally called her to the stand. Her heart pounded in her chest as she rose, her legs unsteady, but she didn't falter. She had been preparing for this moment for weeks, had gone over her testimony time and time again. But now, standing in front of the judge, the lawyers, and the audience, she could feel the full weight of the moment. She had to tell her story. She had to make them understand. She took a deep breath, her hands steady as she gripped the sides of the stand. "Monica, could you please tell the court what happened the night of the incident?" her lawyer asked. Monica nodded, her throat tight. She turned to face the judge, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "It was a typical evening. My son and I were walking home from the store, and we were just minding our own business when two men approached us. They shoved my son, and they began to taunt us, making racial slurs. And when I tried to protect him, Officer Turner showed up, but instead of helping us, he stood with those men. He did nothing to stop them. He didn't even speak up. Monica paused, the words coming more easily now. When I tried to explain what happened, he didn't listen. He sided with them and dismissed us like we didn't matter, like we were the problem. I couldn't believe it. I was scared and I was angry, but more than that, I was disappointed. I had taught my son to trust the police. I had taught him that they were there to protect us. And in that moment, I realized that the system wasn't there to protect people like us. It was there to protect people like him. The courtroom was silent as Monica's words filled the space. She could hear her own voice shaking, but she didn't stop. This was her truth, and she had to make them hear it. I'm here today because I don't want my son to grow up thinking this is normal, she continued, her voice steady now. I don't want him to grow up thinking he has to be afraid of the people who are supposed to protect him. I'm here because I want him to have a future where he doesn't have to fear the color of his skin. Her words hung in the air, the silence in the room heavy with the weight of her statement. She could feel the room shift. Something had changed. The truth was out. They couldn't ignore it anymore. After Monica's testimony, the court recessed, and Monica sat back down, her heart still pounding, but with a new sense of peace. She had done it. She had told her truth. And now there was no turning back. The trial continued for several more days, and though the road ahead was still uncertain, Monica couldn't deny that she had already won something. She had made the world see. She had forced them to listen. The fight was far from over, but the change had begun. Several weeks later, the judge returned with her decision. Monica sat in the courtroom, holding her breath as the verdict was read aloud. Officer Turner was officially dismissed from the police force, and his actions were deemed a violation of the department's policies. But perhaps more importantly, the judge acknowledged the systemic issues that allowed his behavior to persist. The verdict wasn't a perfect victory. It didn't erase the years of injustice, nor did it guarantee that everything would change overnight. But it was a step. It was proof that the fight mattered, that their voices mattered. As Monica left the courtroom, she felt DeAndre's hand slip into hers, warm and steady. The world hadn't changed overnight, but it had changed. She had fought for something and she had won. And for the first time in a long time, Monica allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a better future. Not just for her but for DeAndre. For all of them. The journey wasn't over. But they had started walking in the right direction.